The Sun, you famously came up with the slogan under Kelvin MacKenzie, it was the Sun what won it, this confidence that the paper could sort of shape the discourse, the national discourse about the election. And I think back in the day, the paper did. I have to say the current crop of newspapers just seem to be sticking in pretty poor propaganda. Was it the Rishi Sunak one that Keir Starmer was going to eat your babies if he's elected on July the 4th? This kind of, no one's buying that nonsense, are they? Where's the flair? Where's the fun? Or maybe we've all had enough of newspapers and their partisan bias, and maybe it should be more like LBC, a bit more balance. Well, I'm joined to discuss this by my old boss, Kelvin MacKenzie. In fact, I was working with him at the time we came up with the headline. What was it? The headline he came with, if Kinnock wins this election, will the last person to leave Britain please turn out the lights? Morning to you, Kelvin.
Yeah, morning.
What's changed in our newspaper election coverage?
Well, there's a couple of things that happen. One is that the sales of papers have completely collapsed. Unbelievably, in my day and under my personal genius, they were selling 4.25 million a day, the Sun, and today it probably sells around 400,000. So that's the substantive reason. They don't influence anybody. The managements don't know what to believe. Even somebody like a Murdoch doesn't want to shove it at you anymore for another important reason. The other important reason is that the advertisers do not want politics to be sitting, extreme politics, to be sitting alongside their products. It's the same in the television business, and for that reason, nobody wants to be very strong about it. And if you want to be strong and have news coverage, there is only one solution now, which is to go behind a paywall. Right? Go behind a paywall, and that way you don't have to rely on advertisers to be telling you, oh, we didn't like that headline, we didn't like that choice of story. So in the end of the day, all forms of news coverage will be one way or the other behind a paywall. The days of ad-funded newspapers are at an end, to be honest. I mean, we're seeing it now. I mean, you watch what the Mail Online are doing. They're half pregnant at the moment. Yeah. They're trying to be both behind a paywall and to be ad funded.
Premium
I very much doubt whether that will continue.
It's an interesting situation we're in. I'm trying to work out whether you would consider the political coverage that we see in our newspapers today. I mean, it's still partisan. It's still on side. It's still the stories in the papers still get picked up and run by radio and television, but they just don't seem to cut through in the way that they used to.
No. Well, the other thing is that an exclusive doesn't last more than a nanosecond now. Yeah. So it'd be very difficult to know which paper cover it. For instance, take the Sun. Now, the Sun used to have a very strong political opinions and used to blazon them all over the place. Uniquely in this election, they've kept absolutely stum. Right, they may do this week, but that would be very late. Normally, they announce which party they're going to endorse.
I was just about to ask you. I mean, you and Murdoch. I mean, famously, it was always picking the winner. That was the deal. Yeah. I'm looking at the opinion polls, and I can't quite, for the life of me, work out why the Murdoch stable still appears to be sort of 90% in with Sunak, and with a little bit of cheer for Starmer. It doesn't sort of make sense.
Well, to be honest, I think nobody can make up their mind. If you take the Sun, for instance, if you just take the papers, I'm not talking about the news side, which will be a different demographic, but if you actually took the Sun as it stands today, it would have a demographic of a 60-year-old, possibly older, white man would be buying it. And actually, all the last poll I saw on this done showed that they were predominantly reform voters. The Sun is never going to endorse reform. even although its readers would want it. So they're left with another problem. Do they endorse Labour? Which is the point that you make. Why wouldn't they? They appear to be 1,000 miles in front. And the reason they don't do that is because Starmer was DPP between 2009, I think, and 2013, which is when 25 Sun journalists were charged with paying state officials. Now, they were all cleared, public officials. They were all cleared. However, it obviously all those lives were changed, damaged, or destroyed, and therefore there's obviously a feeling: why should we endorse a guy who attacked our company in this manner? And so they don't do that. But they also know, thirdly, we can't endorse the Conservatives because nobody wants them, not even Conservatives. So they sit there. So they're sitting on their hands. They normally, as I said, would have done. And Murdoch used to say to me, "Get in early because it will do us good in the long run." And what he meant was that we could get change in the Communications Act. We can get various changes around Whitehall about acts which would or legislation which would be unhelpful to us, right? But we've got to get in early. Now they have got in. They haven't got in at all. No. And it will be very interesting to see what they finally decide to do. To endorse Starmer would be a betrayal of their own employees. Do they want to do that? I hope they don't.
To be fair, the management at News UK did betray their own employees as well, separately to that, Kelvin. As you know, so it went both ways. But point taken. Is this the first time that the paper hasn't made a call for a leader? At an election?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the first time. It's because they don't know whether they're fish or fowl. They don't know what to do. Now, of course, Murdoch is now retired, but politically, I'm told he's still active within, in deciding. They couldn't turn around and say, we're going to endorse the monster raving loony party. Murdoch will decide, as he always has done, and as he enjoys doing. He enjoys actually playing politics.
But this could be the year where they don't come out for anyone.
Well, they've left it so late. I mean, here we are. If they don't announce it on Monday, and it would be a very odd thing for them to say when there's such a stark contrast between the three parties or four parties, right? Not to say that this is what we think. The truth is they don't know what to think. They certainly don't want Labour in because I suspect that despite what he says privately, Starmer is likely to bring in legislation which will be unhelpful towards news coverage.
Okay, Kelvin, lovely talking to you. Really interesting take on proceedings, and interesting that. Yeah, I was noticing, maybe you, dear listener, were noticing as well, that the paper hadn't come out for one leader, one party, which is most strange from the paper. It was the Sun what won it.
Sunday Telegraph is warning us Labour will bankrupt every generation. Every generation, warns Rishi Sunak. Sunday Express says Starmer to wreck Britain in 100 days. Is that what we can expect?
Well, I'm surprised they didn't say that the sky would fall in and the river would start running red. The trouble with that kind of attack is it just proves how out of touch they are, because it assumes that the best that this country can do is how it's doing at the moment. And when you look at it, we end this Parliament for the first time in living memory with living standards lower than they were 5 years ago. We end this Parliament with nudging 8 million people on NHS waiting lists. And in terms of the political culture...
We did have a pandemic, to be fair.
And in terms of the political culture, when the Conservative Party call an election, the people close to the decision are not running around printing leaflets and making sure they've got candidates in place and booking the digital advertising. They're on the phone to their bookies. And when you look at all of that and you then think, is this all they've got, is to issue scare stories about the Labour Party? It's just, to me, I don't really care about the attacks. The thing it shows me is an utter lack of awareness about how the public feel about their period in power.
So what can we expect in the first 100 days? So I assume it's not going to be wrecking Britain. So what can we expect?
You can expect a government to turn up and roll up its sleeves and start getting on with what it said in its manifesto. And, we produced a responsible manifesto that had 6 first steps on the economy, health, education, crime, borders and energy. That's our early priorities. That's what we want to get on with. And that's what a government led by Keir Starmer will do. But I also have to say, and you'd expect me to say this election is in no way done, in no way decided. And if people want change from the kind of things I said at the beginning of the interview, the only way to get it is to vote on
Do you believe the polls?
I don't, and I cast them aside. And when we get to polling day and we get to real voters, they won't be worth dust, because a democracy is a really awesome thing. This is in people's hands now, and the question in their minds has to be, do I want 5 more years of what I've had in recent years, or do we want to turn the page and start to rebuild? And I'm confident if people think about it like that, and they look at the Labour Party, they'll be able to see a party that's changed, that is responsible and ambitious, and that's what our manifesto set out.
Well, you mentioned your manifesto. I just want to talk to you a little bit about it, and not the really specific things, because they've been rehearsed to death. But I'm thinking sort of big picture here, and something that the Labour Party has always historically been associated with. In a way, it's its kind of moral mission throughout its history has been to reduce inequality. Inequality isn't mentioned very often in your manifesto. Do you know how many times it is mentioned?
I haven't done a word count.
Once.
But there's...
You compare that to 2019, that was over 25 times.
Yeah, but...
So can we conclude, therefore, that by comparison, the Labour Party to 4 years ago is less concerned about inequality than it was? Because you talk about growth a lot.
Yeah.
But you don't talk about inequality very much these days.
We don't just talk about growth. This is what I'm coming on to say. We don't just talk about growth. We do talk about it, and I want, it is the central challenge facing the country, and it is the thing which, it's the only thing that can get the country out of this tax and spend debate that we're having all the time about the government budget rather than about household budgets. And those household budgets being lower now in real terms than they were 5 years ago is why people are really feeling the pinch. So we do talk about growth, and you have to have growth because it's the central challenge facing the country, but, and this is a really important but, there's no point in having growth if it's not felt in every part of the country and by people in every income group.
So would you
and
rather have less
really
growth but more equally distributed, or just have growth for its own sake?
Well, I hope that's not the choice, but I really want to make sure that if we get growth, it is well distributed around the country.
So less growth but better distributed, that's what you'd prefer?
We've tried a low growth era.
Yeah.
It hasn't done very well for people. So we need high growth, but you've also at the same time got to make sure it's well distributed. That's why, for example, we see something like the energy transition as having the capacity to create good jobs all around the country. It's why part of what's in our manifesto is to devolve more powers over things like transport and skills to the elected mayors. It's really important that the economy is driven by all parts of the country. Now, I think our capital city is great. I don't like anti-London rhetoric, but I don't want it to be just about London. It's got to be about the whole country.
Will Britain be more equal at the end of the next Parliament if there's a Labour government than at the beginning?
Well, I think you'll have to judge us then.
No, but is that your aim?
Our aim is to make sure that if we get growth, the benefits are felt in all parts of the country.
So it will be more equal. There'll be less inequality than there is now. Say less income inequality.
I would like to see rising real incomes in every part of the country, because that's the way to
But are you bothered?
more...
But every politician always wants that. So are you bothered about...
It's not something we've had in the last 5 years.
No, but it's still what I mean, Margaret Thatcher, for example, would not have particularly cared. She was very explicit about this in terms of the inequality between income groups and whether that growth... So do you want Britain to be more equal at the end of the Parliament at the beginning? Because I'm surprised that you can't just say yes, because surely that is the point of every Labour government.
Well, I would say the point of a Labour government is twofold. One is to generate the wealth needed to have a strong economy. And the second is to make sure that the fruits of that are enjoyed by people of all income groups.
Yes.
That's what we want to do.
But surely also, I mean, Harold Wilson once famously said that the Labour Party was a moral crusade, or if it's nothing. Surely the central axis or the central axiom of that moral crusade was to lessen inequality.
Yeah.
So surely you would say today that you want to lessen inequality.
The reason I'm hesitating is you can have a massive recession and you can be more equal after it, and everybody's poorer. Is that a good outcome?
Well, let's assume there isn't a recession. Let's assume that there is growth. Because I'm assuming you're not going to say that there's going to be a recession under a Labour government. You're going to obviate all.
No, but this is why this.
But it's an important discussion about principles, isn't it, Pat? Because people want to know what your priority is. So let's assume there isn't a recession, but there is growth. You're successful in delivering that growth. Will you have failed if that growth is not felt? Let's put it this way: the more of that growth does not go to the poorest income groups than the richest.
I'm not about to announce anything about the failure of a Labour government when we haven't had one for 14
but
years.
It's not. But surely people need to know what your priorities are. Surely your priorities are the poorest groups, not the richest. If you're a Labour government, surely.
Of course, and the priority is to make sure that we get a stronger economy and everywhere around the country enjoys the benefits from it. And if we had a stronger economy and that wasn't the case, then that's not the outcome we want. And when we produced those mission documents about 18 months ago, that's explicitly what we said. We said we did want growth, but we didn't just want a higher rate of GDP. This had to be felt in people's pockets around the country.
The Tories still do have some substantial media support in terms of the newspapers. You know, we've been talking all morning about these pretty florid headlines from, say, The Express, The Mail, Sunday Telegraph. And obviously we've seen the Sunday Times endorse Labour, albeit in a quite lukewarm way for the first time since 2005. A lot of speculation about what the Sun will do. They haven't said what they're doing yet. What do you think they'll do? And does it matter?
Well, I can't see them endorsing Labour now. I think if they were going to endorse Labour, I wonder whether it would have happened earlier on in the campaign. I think in 97 they did it far earlier and it was front page. It was a really, really big deal, and obviously Blair did a lot of work to make that happen. I feel like the fact that they've been given a fair-ish hearing, Labour people would say, during the campaign means that in the Sun means it will matter less whatever they do now, even if they don't endorse Labour, which I don't expect they will. I think they may do a similar-ish thing to the Sunday Times, but I think that's the best Labour can hope for. What do you think?
What do I think? I don't think it matters very much these days, funnily enough. I think, back in the day, Kelvin MacKenzie, the former editor of The Sun, was talking on LBC to Matthew Wright earlier, and he was making the point, which is right, when in his day, when they were deciding who they were going to back, it was 4 to 5 million, in terms of the readership. And even then, lots of political scientists would say, actually, did it actually make much of a difference? You look at the sort of data and so on, and very often they would just go with the way the wind was blowing anyway. So but particularly these days, I'm not convinced it matters very much. It seems to me that the difficulty with getting the Sun, is there is still so much resentment in the Murdoch empire about Keir Starmer being the DPP at the time of the phone hacking trials and so on. And by all accounts, that's just a big problem they just won't get over.
But even the fact that there were question marks over whether the Sun would endorse Keir Starmer, even though he was involved with that, I think is pretty astonishing. It shows how much work he's put in. But I actually thought, and I know we'll come on to Pat McFadden, I thought it was interesting that he did say, we want the Sun endorsement, because the Sun obviously does have a really complicated relationship with the Labour Party. And I think, when Gordon Brown, the Sun, was still supporting the Labour Party, and then at Labour conference,
I remember
they switched their endorsement. It was absolutely brutal. So it is a complicated relationship. But you do have Pat McFadden saying, we do still want their endorsement.
The Labour kind of tone they're adopting at the moment is really interesting, isn't it? I thought with Pat McFadden there when he was talking to me, there is this sort of, even with their attacks on the Tories at the very start about this newspaper stuff, there's a sort of almost rather in sorrow rather than in anger kind of tone to the whole thing, rather than what you might expect, which is a sort of 4 days before polling day, absolutely visceral. There is a sort of, it's almost like they're in government already.
I think that's completely right. And I think if you compare the interview you just did with Oliver Dowden and with Pat McFadden, Oliver Dowden was really, really, really on the attack. It was personal. He was going for reform. He was going for the Labour Party. And then Pat McFadden sits down and just talks about what he might do. And obviously that was as a result of your questioning as well. But it felt very almost serene and very much like he was basically already in office. And the questions you were asking about, equality and the manifesto and Palestine, there were questions about things that will really, really affect them in sort of 4 days' time if the polls are to be believed. And of course, he has to keep on saying, don't know whether the polls are right, don't know whether we'll be in. But I did think that the sort of tone he adopted throughout that was really interesting.
Do you buy the nervousness? Do you think they really are nervous? Of course, they'll be nervous because, we can't know what the outcome is. But how credible do you think they're?
I think they are nervous that the majority won't be that big. I don't think think they think that the Tories will be back in government. But I do think, I mean, I was speaking to people this weekend, just normal people, and one of them...
We do know a few.
just one normal person. Yeah. And they were saying to me, I don't like the Tories, but Labour are going to win a massive majority, so I'm going to vote Green. And I thought, God, that is interesting. That is the thing Labour are really worried about.
All the focus groups are showing that supermajority thing, which is not a term in the British Constitution, but it's used as shorthand for a big majority. It has, according to all the focus groups and so on that I've seen the data from, it has seeped through. It has actually been a quite successful attack. People are thinking about it anyway.
And that's why, when you speak to Tory operatives, they say people will, either will get, I'm honestly saying this genuinely, either will get 30 seats or will get 200 seats. And it depends on Thursday whether people vote with their head or with their heart. And if it's with their heart, we will get 30 seats. And if it's with their head, it'll be 200. And that's because that supermajority line will have cut through with people.
And we're already, in a way, starting to see the sort of changing the guard, aren't we? Have you seen this morning about Simon Case stepping down as the Cabinet Secretary, most senior civil service official in Britain? He's the guy who greets the incoming Prime Minister at the other end or the other side of the number 10 door on the day after a general election, sits down with him and says, "What do you want to do, Prime Minister?" Simon Case, who's been a quite controversial figure for all sorts of reasons, being reported that he's going to step down.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is something that's been talked about for a long time, and it's kind of been reported that he has a slightly strained relationship, I suppose, with Sue Gray, who'll be the incoming Chief of Staff. So I wonder whether it's something to do with that. But also, of course, he went on sick leave for a long time and had his reputation slightly damaged over Partygate. But yeah, Labour will want to bring someone new in. And I think there was reporting during the week that the Treasury had even started changing around their bathroom because they were going to have a female chancellor for the first time. So it is, and we know that there is have been real conversations for a really long time in Whitehall about what it actually looks like when there is, or if there is, this changing of the guard.
So Gabriel Pogren, a journalistic colleague of ours from the Sunday Times, he is reporting this is what we can expect. So 7th to 9th of July, MPs will be sworn in. 17th of July, King's Speech. 30th of July, housing targets. 31st of July, Parliament rises, i.e. breaks up for the summer, which is later than it normally would be. And the 2nd of September, MPs return. So that's the first 100 days.